slightly different angle. All right, folks, I'm sure we've got plenty of other people coming in here. Just to get things started as people fill in, I know we've got a bunch of coaches that register for this. So this is not directed to you. This is directed to the potential recruits and their parents that are here. So what I'd be interested to see, go to the meeting chat and please put in for me the year that you were thinking that you go to uni. So if it's this year, for example, 2024, next year, 2025, just give us a sense of where people are at in this process, how far out they're looking. Okay. I know that's not for you, Nick. All right, so 1 so far. 2026 is reasonable. 25, okay. Got to work a little faster on 2025, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. 26. If somebody comes in and says 24, then okay, we might have to have some conversations. Leaving it a little bit late. Not that it's impossible, but yeah, as people come in, just if you do have the year that you're looking at going to uni, or your child is looking to go to uni, or any player that you're working with, coaches, if that's you, go ahead. I think 26 is probably going to be a popular one. I don't know if we're probably a little too early for the 27s, maybe a few 25s. So just to give everybody, oh, we've got a question already. You can use, Derek, you can use the Q&A to ask questions, and we'll see it come up there. Ideally, we'll have we'll leave the questions for the end, unless it's something really, really pressing, just because we've kind of left room for it. And I'll actually flip the slide so we can go into how we're going to do this today. So we've got basically 3 main chunks. The first of which is looking at kind of the broad landscape of college volleyball in the US, which some of you may have an impression of, others may have no idea about. So Katelynn and I are going to try to get on that. Second is actually what kind of the steps of the recruiting process. The third, we'll get into timelines and tips and a few things like that. And then we'll do Q&A at the end that kind of rolls off the timeline and tips, and hopefully some of that will dovetail together. But before we get going, we'll do introductions. For those who don't know me, which is probably most people, to be honest, my name is John Forman. I am the strategic manager for talent with Volleyball England, which means I sit over the top of the national team structures for England. And Katelynn is actually one of our coaches, but Katelynn, go ahead, you can introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Katelynn. I'm part of VE on the talent pathway as one of the assistant coaches. I'm also doing a postdoc at Loughborough. Yeah, I'm in beautiful Loughborough, and I'm also the head coach of the women's program there at the moment.
So we brought Katelynn in because she's actually gone through all this process. Obviously, as an American, as you might be able to sort out by the accent, but she's been at a couple of different schools, been in a couple of different levels of volleyball in the States. So I think that'll be useful for helping to understand the picture. I myself coached at all 3 NCAA levels. We'll get to that in a moment, plus at the junior college level, plus at the juniors level. So I've been on the recruiting side of this. I've helped kids on the recruiting side, on the other side of it. So hopefully between the two of us, we'll have a lot of this stuff covered. All right, so without further ado, let's just kind of get into the landscape here. And I'll just start off with kind of the monstrosity that is college volleyball in the US. And there's roughly, I think, about 1,200 to 1,300 total college volleyball teams. When you count, actually, it's more than that. I think it's about 1,700. I was just, the numbers in my head was just for the NCAA alone, men and women. So the biggest one is NCAA. That's 4-year schools. It comprises Division I, Division II, and Division III. The difference between the 3, there's 2 pieces to it. Most people will think about the scholarship side of it, and that's part of it. But it starts off with the size of the athletic department. So Division I schools have to have a minimum of 14 athletic teams participating to be Division I. I don't know exactly what the numbers are in Division II and Division III. I just happened to see that number very recently, but that's the starting point. We'll talk about the scholarships in a second because it all factors into things. At the four-year school level, NAIA is kind of the next big one. Those NCAA and NAIA are the two that you will have heard about. They're the two that you do most of the recruiting that you would be involved with. The other four-year school structures are generally religiously affiliated schools. There's a couple of organizations that are around that. So I think one of them is like National Christian Collegiate something or other. I am coaching that, so I'm not entirely, it's evolved, but I think that there's overlap between those organizations. So I'm not sure exactly what the numbers are, but it's maybe a couple hundred schools that fall in there, and they do also overlap a bit with the NCAA. So they're not just out there by themselves. You also see NJCAA on this list, National Junior College Athletic Association. So these are the two-year schools. Ultimately, what the two-year schools give you, instead of a bachelor's degree, as the four-year ones do, they give you an associate's degree. You can then use that to transfer onto a four-year school to finish and develop your bachelor's. There's also California has their own two-year college. It's like CCA, I think is what, yeah, something, California College Association, something like that. But again, similar in idea. And actually the NJCAA is structured quite similarly to the NCAA, and it also has three divisions. Again, size will be a factor, but it also ties in with scholarship availability, which will be the next thing, which is probably the thing most people care about, because obviously you ultimately have to pay for all this. So at the top, you have what you'll probably have heard are full rides. That means a full athletic scholarship it's meant to cover the total cost of attendance. Now, there's a lot going on that you may have heard about or you may read about in terms of going beyond that, players getting paid, players being considered employees, all that else. I'll leave that aside for the moment because it's complicated and there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of legislation and stuff that's going on there, and it's very kind of up in the air, and it doesn't really impact people very much right now. It's kind of a down the line thing. So to keep the simple part of it is you have full athletic scholarships, you have partial athletic scholarships, which can be anything up from very little to almost the whole thing. And then obviously you have no scholarship, no athletic scholarship. Division III schools have no athletic scholarships at all. That's part of the process. They can cover the full cost of your tuition and attendance through academic scholarships, any other grants and whatever they might have available to them, or they could give you access to. Just none of it can be athletically related. Division I can go up to full athletic scholarships, and so can Division II, but it's the numbers that are different. In Division I, and this is going to get a little confusing. So in Division I in women's volleyball, they're allowed 12 athletes on scholarship. Normally, that means 12 players on full ride, but not always, because not all schools are what we call fully funded, meaning they have the resources to fund 12 full scholarships. So I was at Radford University last year, which is in Virginia. It's a Division I school. We were not fully funded. We could only do about, I think, 8.5, something like that was our number, which means that's how many equivalencies of a scholarship to how much money we had. So take a full scholarship, multiply it by 8.5, and that's the total scholarship pool we had that we could divide up among 12 players. So we really didn't have anybody on full, but we had 12 players on at least partial, and it varied how much that was. On the men's side, they don't have nearly as much. I think it's 4.5 for the men, and they are not on a kind of what we call a head count. Division I women are on a head count, which means 12 people. Division I men are on a scholarship count, which is 4.5. They can divide that up among however many people they want. It could be 4 people, 5 people, or it could be 20. And they've got gigantic rosters, so they really could spread it out over a lot of people. Beach volleyball works the same way. They have, I think it's six or 8, depending on the division.
Yeah.
But again, it's the scholarship number, it's not the head count number. So they can divvy that up however many ways suits them. Division 2 works like the men and works like beach. Again, it's the scholarship number. They're allowed up to 8. So again, they can split that up however many ways they want. You probably won't find too many Division 2 schools that just give out 8 full scholarships, because that would probably leave you without a lot of depth on your roster if anybody, if it were to happen to anybody. So that's just kind of the difference. If you hear head count, which you probably won't very much, but if you do it, that's what it means. NCAA Division 1 women are head count. So they can have 12 on scholarship. Everybody else is based on the scholarship equivalencies figures. So that's probably a lot of different stuff.
John, I'm happy to give my kind of experience. I know I'm quite comfortable talking about mine experience with scholarship, because as John did say, I, played it at various different levels. So I started off at an NJCAA, or a JUCO, so a 2-year, and I was in Kansas. So in Kansas, the rule is JUCOs, the most they can offer is tuition and board. So it's kind of like full or room or something, like they can do tuition, but then you have to pay for your own accommodation. So that was just the rule in Kansas. So in a sense, I was on the most they could give me. I then transferred after my 2 years. I transferred out to a Division 1. And as John said, I had 1 full scholarship. They couldn't break it up. So I was on a full ride out at a Division 1. Long story short, ended up transferring to a Division 2, where the coach could divide up scholarships. So I had a partial athletic scholarship that, if I can remember correctly, was 75%. The rest of the 25%, because I could get academic scholarship, filled the rest in. So to help spread the volleyball money around the team, those of us that had academic scholarship, we would fill that in as much as we could with the academic side of things, and then the rest was filled in with volleyball. So there also is academic scholarships, but that's going to depend uni to uni. But that's kind of how that was my experience, and the way it changed based on what university and level I was at.
Yeah, and like with us at Radford, it was the same sort of situation with the girls that were on scholarship. There was, they had the athletic piece. They could make the difference up if they had the academics to get a scholarship there, they could make that up. Maybe there were some other pieces, but again, it couldn't add up to more than the full cost of attendance. So it's not like you could get a 75% academic and a 50% athletic and end up with 125. No, this doesn't work that way. just to be aware. NJCAA, as Katelynn has alluded to, they do have scholarships kind of on a similar structure. It's going to be more along the lines of number than head count. So it'll follow most of what everybody else is doing. And it's going to vary a lot based on the schools. And this applies pretty much to all of this, because when somebody says Division 1, the automatic implication is, oh, full scholarship. Everybody's on full scholarship. That's not even close to being the truth. Not even close. Yes, if you were Power 5 conference, they're going to go 12 deep with full scholarships. And maybe if you get to the mid-majors and some of the better programs that are maybe not, well, actually, is it Power 5 anymore now that the Pac-12 is kind of disintegrated, the Power 4? Anyway, you're relatively quickly are going to get to the point where programs are not fully funded. And actually, there's the Ivy League, which is Division 1, which does no athletic scholarships. They don't do academic scholarships either. It's all need-based. So if you ever hear somebody say, I get a full ride to Harvard or to Yale, it's not athletic and it's not academic. That means they were low in the income scale and got a lot of grant money and that sort of thing. So don't let people kind of fool you with some of this stuff. So hopefully that kind of gives you a sense of things. being an international, you're going to get questions almost straight off. What kind of funding do you have? If it's a school that can offer you a full athletic scholarship, it's not going to come up. It'll be pretty straightforward. Either they're going to offer it to you or they're going to have nothing to offer to you. It's going to be cut and dried that way pretty much. If you're talking where it's more of a more of a Division II or less than fully funded Division I, they're going to want to know, are you going to be able to contribute something to your education? Because we can't give you a full, at least athletically. Again, maybe you can make it up on the academic side or some other things. Just so be aware of that and have that budget thought process going on. Because a lot of the internationals that I saw when I was recruiting over there automatically came in saying, I need a full, I need a full, I need a full. When actually in the reality, they probably didn't if their grades were good enough. Mm-hmm. But they had this full mentality and they couldn't think of anything else. So we just kind of like, well, if that's the way it is, we can't offer you that. So you got to move on to somebody else. So just have that thought in mind and understand the flexibility and be able to talk with the schools about, okay, what is the cost of attendance? What will the athletic cover? What are the prospects for an academic or other sorts of grants or scholarships that are available? And if any of this confuses you, feel free to ping us at the end during the Q&A, because I know there's kind of a lot there. I'm going to shift this over to Katelynn now because she's been through this, but I want her to give you a sense of what it actually is like to be a student athlete, and that is the term, student athlete. That's what the NCAA and that's what they all use. They try to harp on student being first, but Katelynn will give you a sense of exactly how much that is true.
Yes. So from being in the UK and mainland Europe now for almost seven years now, and being involved in volleyball here at the university level, it is a massive difference. And the reality of being a student athlete, regardless of what level you're at, whether you're on a full ride or you're at a 2-year, 1 or 2, it is a commitment, and it's something you have to be ready to do and you want to do. So the best way to give you insight is my daily schedule. So during season, when I was at a JUCO, there are no contact or practice restrictions. So that means we can practice as much as the coach wants us. We can be in the weight room as much as the coach wants us. We can watch as much game film. There was no restriction on how much contact they had. At the NCAA, I believe it's still 20 hours a week. Correct me, John. Yep. And you have to have at least 1 day off. Yep. So at the NCAA level, there's a little bit more protection in terms of court time and practice. But regardless of what level I was at, you will have 2 weeks of preseason, usually, before going. At least. 3 weeks, you will practice 2 to 3 times a day. For, if you're at the NCAA, you'll have 1 day a week off. At the JUCO, it was 14, 15, 16 days straight with, weights, conditioning, and court time 2 to 3 times a day minimum.
Actually, technically, during preseason, the days off thing doesn't count.
Oh, it doesn't? Okay.
No, it only counts when school is in session.
Okay, yeah. So I guess that was just
most coaches are not that crazy that they just run you for 2-3 straight weeks, 2 or 3 times a day. So
right. Yeah, and even on your off days, if we weren't on the court, we were watching game film, we were doing team activities. So it is a daily thing. It is not you train 2 times a week and you play once. It is you will have some sort of contact with your coach in terms of game film, playing S&C almost every single day of the week. So for example, one day, I would get up, we had weights at 6 a.m. because in the USA, we have 8 a.m.s. So here, most uni classes start at 9. In the US, at the unis I went to, classes started at 8 a.m. So we would have weights and conditioning, maybe 2 times a week, 1 time a week, depending on our playing schedule. Would go from 6 to 7:30, go to class from 8 to 1 p.m. I was part of programs that we had to do between even 4 to 8 hours of study hall a week, mandated. So we would have to go into a classroom. Our coaches would take our phones and we would have to log study hours. So you would do study hall. We may watch film before a practice, an hour of film if we had a match coming up or we were reflecting on our own performances. And then practice was anywhere between 2 to 3 hours every day. Get done at 5, 6 p.m., go to dinner, and then go to the library the rest of the night. And that's typically during season. And that's, I played at different levels, and that was pretty standard regardless of what level. So it is a commitment. It's, in the US, I grew up in that culture. So when I was 13, 14, I knew I wanted to play university volleyball. So, I was already doing S&C 2 or 3 times a week. I was training 5, 6 days a week through high school or club. And so, and I had family members go through it. And it is an adjustment, even if you are expecting it and you grow up, because it is grueling, but it's also very, very rewarding. But it is a lot of contact time. And so, injuries, things like that. But I found it really rewarding. But it is a shock when you first get there. So I think just athletes being aware of the reality of what it is like to be a student athlete, and also the requirements, there's GPA requirements so that your grade point averages cannot fall below a certain threshold or you cannot play. And depending on what you major in, if you're pre-med, biology, physics, you might have a lot of labs that you have to work around. I regularly had to take exams earlier than most of my classmates. So if I was traveling, which you do quite a bit of, and I had an exam on Thursday or Friday and I was going to miss it, the lecturer would say, okay, well, then you got to take it Wednesday before you leave. There was also some exams online that I was taking on the bus. I could be gone for 4 days and then come right back and take an exam. So it's just that time management to also make sure you are studying, because yes, you are supposed to be a student athlete, but there are times where you are probably more athlete than student, realistically.
Real quick, because are you seeing just the intro slide, or are you actually seeing further in?
Sorry?
Are you just, okay, are the slides changing?
They are now. Well, they just did, yeah.
Okay, all right. For some reason, I'm only seeing one of them. But anyway, okay. I'm going to extend that real quick, but I want to just back up a little and just talk about how the seasons are, because not surprisingly, Division I has the longest season. They go from roughly the last weekend of August, so like the last Friday of August, to about the second Saturday or Sunday of November for the regular season. Conference tournament is after, there's the week after that for those conferences that have those. And then obviously the NCAA tournament starts right near the beginning of December, is kind of usually over the first 3 weekends of December. Division II, you can kind of squeeze that by about a week.
Yeah.
It's about a week shorter. Division III is even shorter than that. They're done before, in the US, Thanksgiving, which is in the latter part of November. So they're done basically by mid-November, having started usually the first Friday in September, depending on when that falls. So they express views across the different divisions. Everybody acknowledges that Division I is the most intense, the least balanced, even though they talk about they want balance, but they progressively say, okay, Division II is meant to be a bit more balanced. Division III is meant to be optimal balance. So in Division III, there is an off season, but it's quite constrained. You're only allowed right now, I think the rules have changed, are changing. It's either 12 or 15 days where you're allowed to get together in the off season to actually be on court, do stuff that are mandatory. Everything else during the off season is voluntary, which you can get into all discussions about what voluntary really means, but coaches aren't technically able to be involved or to direct them or anything like that. Division I and Division II actually have spring season off seasons, because it's obviously it's different for the men. So in that time, there's two pieces to it. There's kind of a proper off season, which runs about 5 weeks, 6 weeks, depending, in which time you can actually play competition. You're restricted on how far you can go. Generally, there's not going to be overnight travel, that sort of thing. But otherwise, it's kind of like regular season. You're training 5 days a week, 20-hour limits, just like during the regular season. Before that, there's this period from kind of the beginning of second term for the women, and it's kind of the beginning of first term for the men because their seasons are flipped for usually about a month and a half, give or take, depending on the school's academic calendar and how they want to schedule it out. You're in kind of this 8-hour week. And so coaches, it used to be that you could only be on court for 2 hours. They've changed that now. So they've balanced it out a little bit. But usually it's split between a couple of sessions a week on court plus sessions with the strength and conditioning and those sorts of things. But again, you're limited to 8 total hours because this is the balance beat. They want you to actually be able to do stuff in the alternate semester, to take the classes you need to take, be involved with social activities, all these sorts of things, while not entirely avoiding the commitment of being an athlete in there as well.
Well, John, you mentioned the seasons, and I was just thinking when I played junior college ball, it's 3, we end right before right before Thanksgiving or right after. Usually that's when the national championship is. And, there's a lot less restrictions, things like that, in how many tournaments you can play in and all that. And I remember one year we played about 40 matches in 3 months. We played against a team that was pushing 56, 57 matches in 3 months, just because there's, you can go off and play in as many tournaments as you want. So it can get, that's a lot of matches, 40 matches in 3 months.
Yeah, in Division I, they'll usually get to about 30 more if you get into the postseason.
Yeah.
Division II is going to be close, a little bit less because they usually have 1 week less in the calendar. Division III, you're probably going to be in the 20s.
Yeah.
Maybe pushing toward 30 if you're making the postseason. The numbers used to be a lot higher, crazy higher in some cases. But over the years, coaches, especially at the higher levels, have restricted. They don't want to play 2 matches in a day anymore, or play 4 in 2 days. I saw one team actually back when I was coaching in the early 2000s, played 3 matches in a day. And you won't be surprised to hear that they got worse and worse as the day went along because they were just exhausted. Fortunately, we were playing them last, so we had an easy win. The other thing I wanted to bring up here is, and Katelynn talked about the less / non-existent rules for the JUCOs. NCAA has by far the most complicated rules, the largest rule book, and Division I is the most intense of all of that, especially when it comes to recruiting. Division III recruiting rules are actually relatively light. We'll get into some of this stuff in terms of contact time, which is always something that comes up. But just generally speaking, it's easier on the rule side of things in Division III than it is in Division I and II. NAIA is a very light touch on the rules, probably even lighter than the NJCAA is overall. So if you want to really relaxed attitude, go to the NAIA. But they also have unlimited substitutions, which is, to me, is kind of insane. Anyway. All right, so a couple of things that definitely come up a lot these days: name, image, and likeness, NIL, and the transfer portal. Now, what the portal wasn't a thing yet for you, was it, Katelynn?
No, we had to do it old school, where you would have to sit down with your coach and ask to be released. You weren't allowed to contact any other coaches. So no, I have no, and the NIL was also not around when I played. So these are relatively new things.
Yeah. NIL is still a very much an evolving thing because there's rules. The different states have different rules, and the state rules that dominate there. And I don't know. We'll see how it all evolves. Volleyball, women's volleyball does have people who get money. And actually, there was kind of a joke on a sports show from the States about whether the star of the Nebraska women's volleyball team was getting more NIL money than the quarterback from the Nebraska football team. Might be close. Nebraska volleyball has had a much better track record these last few years, decades, than the football team has. But anyway, so there are definitely opportunities. However, it gets tricky when you're a foreigner because your student visa only allows you to work up to, I think, 20 hours a week in something that's related to your degree program. So if you're doing chemistry for your major, they're not going to say, yeah, you can make NIL money by working camps and promoting yourself as a volleyball athlete. That won't fly. There's some question as to whether you could get an NIL deal here in England or outside of the US. That's something we want to explore from a legal perspective to see if that could help people. But for the time being, it's not something that you're likely going to be able to access if you're on a student visa. If you've got American citizenship and you can get in that way, different story. But on a student visa, you're going to be restricted. There's no restriction on you using the portal, though, which basically they instituted this a few years ago. And what it is there are times when you can do this and times when you can't. But if you decide that you no longer want to be at the school you're at, you want to look for another school, you talk to the compliance officer at your school, they put you in the portal, at which point any other school, any other coach can be in touch with you. If you're not in the portal, coaches can't talk to you. That's the rule. We can debate whether it gets followed or how people work around it in different ways, but they can't speak to you directly unless you're in the portal. So, but once you're in there, it's open and there's no restriction on who you can talk to or how long or anything like that. There's just certain windows on when you can get in there. Division III has a slightly different structure. There is a portal, but you don't really need it because you can sign your own release letter and it serves the same purpose. So it doesn't get used as much. And honestly, there isn't as much transfer in Division III because the motivations of the student athletes tend to be a lot more academic. So they pick the school for the academic programs, and they're more likely to stay, where obviously, unless they decide they want to do something completely different that their current school doesn't have, or the circumstances drive them out. So it's Division I and Division II that you see much more of the transfer activity. It is not as big as everybody kind of makes it out to be, especially in volleyball. Okay, basketball, football, it gets a lot of hype. And there's a lot of people moving around, and there are definitely people moving around in volleyball. But it's the percentages aren't like massive. It's not like 30% of people are jumping in the portal every year. It's not. And it's actually the numbers are going to drop off now after this year, because for the last several years we've had the players with COVID who got extra years because of COVID have been in the portal to transfer to be grad students at other schools. This is the last year of those athletes. So the numbers we'll see going through the portal are likely to drop off quite a bit moving forward. And so the portal for the grad students will be more people who maybe they had an injury or they redshirted a year. Redshirt means you sat out a season. You didn't lose any eligibility, you just sat out a season. So if you still have eligibility, going into grad school, you can still play as a grad student using up that eligibility. For everybody else, this is the warning. I haven't seen numbers yet for last year, but the NCAA about this time last year reported numbers up to the year before, the first 2 years of the portal. And it's not a guarantee that you go into the portal and you find a new place. And it's even less of a guarantee that you end up on scholarship where you go. I think a lot of people kind of go into this college recruiting thing like, okay, I'll take this offer, and if I don't like it, I'll jump. Yes, that's an option, and you can pursue that, but there's no guarantee that you're going to end up with any recruitment, or that if you do get recruited somewhere else, it's going to end up being a better situation, or you're going to get more money, or any of those things. So just be cautious about that. And my advice, and Katelynn, I'm guessing you would recommend the same thing, is pick the school for the school, with volleyball being the nice add-on, and think of it in terms of, I want to be there, not it's all about the volleyball and everything else is ancillary, because everything else does matter a lot.
Yeah, it starts to add up. And John, I was just thinking about the distinction between junior colleges and four-year programs. So, John's talking about, until you have your release or you're in the portal, you're not allowed to speak to other coaches. So when you're at an NJCAA, a two-year college, for example, I went there to widen up my recruitment opportunities. I was a 5'4" setter, so getting coaches to consider me was pretty hard. So I used the two-year university to play for a very established winning program, but to increase my recruitment prospects, to show coaches I can play at a high level despite being 5'4". I can run an offense, I can block, I can be offensively aggressive. But while I was at a junior college, I was available to talk to coaches, if I remember correctly, without restrictions, because most people go to a junior college, a two-year college, to get recruited by then a 4-year. So my coaches were a part of my recruitment process. I told them, I want to go here, here, and here. I want to go to the coast somewhere. And they said, okay, we will email coaches on your behalf. If anybody registers interest in you, we'll let you know. So it was a different dynamic, that their goal was to help us get to the next 4 years. So they were, it was a little bit different. You work more in tandem with your coaches to help get you to a 4-year. So the contact rules are different. I think there was restrictions on when the coaches can contact you, but there was no restriction on my part of when I could email a coach and express interest.
Right. Yeah, well, and that applies generally. You can always email coaches.
Yeah.
It's just a question of whether or not they can respond to you.
Exactly. So yeah, that's just kind of the difference, where if you're transferring at an NCAA, a coach may not, go out and recruit for you, but at a junior college, that sole purpose is you play for 2 years, we help you, we make your highlight film, we promote you, we then get you on to a 4-year to finish out your last 2 years.
Yeah, and if you look at the rosters of the better JUCOs, the better 2-year schools, the ones that are playing for national championships, they're full of foreign players looking to use it as a launch pad to get into a 4-year school, because there is scholarship money, the level of play is good, and the coaches will try to help you move along. So it is, as much as it's nice and easy to go straight into a 4-year school and just kind of be done with it and do your 4 years, that doesn't work for everybody, and the 2-year path can be quite useful. There are certain restrictions on when you're able to transfer based on some academic stuff. We don't need to get into that now because it gets a little technical. But for the most part, if you're in good academic standing going in, you're probably going to be able. And if you get your degree, if you're going to graduate from that junior college, then you're good. It's only people who want to like do a one and done, do a season and try to jump straight away that things get a little messy. But anyway, we'll move on and kind of timeline what the process actually looks like. So I've kind of laid it out here in these 7 steps. Obviously, first you kind of you need to decide this might be something that's interesting for you. Then you're going to want to start looking at where. And there's a lot of questions to this. What degree program do you want? For some of you, if you say biology, that's going to cover a vast amount of schools, so you have plenty of choices. But if it's something much more specialized, then there are only going to be a few schools, and you obviously have to concentrate on those. You mentioned being on the coast, Katelynn. Do you want to be on the coast? Do you want to be away from the coast? Do you want more of an urban campus, a suburban campus, a rural campus, warm weather, cold weather, temperate weather? Size of the school can make a huge difference, because some of these schools are going to have a few hundred people, and then some of the big ones are going to have 70,000. And which means obviously the campuses are bigger, the interactions you have are very different. So these are all part of the environment, the equation that you need to think about going into. And I'll tell you that a lot of internationals get this part wrong. They don't think about this. So they think volleyball scholarship, go to the States, great, everything's going to be great. And then they realize, oh, I didn't want to be at a small school. Oh, I didn't want to be at a school 2 hours away from the nearest city with nothing to do. Katelynn, how far away were you from anything at your school in Kansas?
Oh, when I was at a junior college, so long story short, junior colleges were originally built for farming communities, for kids that couldn't leave or go very far from home because they needed to work on the farm. So I was in Arkansas City, Kansas, and there is not much there. When John said when you're looking at things that matter to you, coming out of high school, I knew I was not good enough to play at a Division 1. I was probably good enough to sit on the bench, but I didn't want to sit on the bench. I wanted to win and I wanted to start or be a good contender for starting. So, and it was called Cali College. It was in the middle of nowhere, but they had won a national championship, and that appealed to me more than being in an urban city. I was ready to give up an urban city, with cool things to do and nightlife to go and win a national championship. And that was something I was willing to do. Now, there's probably some people who decided to go there and were like, where am I? What the heck am I doing? Doesn't matter if I'm at a good program. I don't want to be out in the middle of nowhere in Kansas. So those things do add up and matter. So I think you need to know what you value and what you're prioritizing.
Yeah, I spoke to a Polish boy who had just finished his first year at a Division 2 school in the Carolinas. I forget exactly which one. In the Conference Carolinas conference. Now, just quick side note, in men's volleyball, there are Division 1, 2, and 3, but Division 1 and 2 are a joint championship. So they kind of lump them all together. His issue was he realized really quickly that he should have given a lot more thought to the environment he was going into. I think the volleyball piece of it was fine for him, but the not having anything to do when there wasn't volleyball going on was not so fine. And he also had a few, maybe didn't connect as well with his teammates as he might have liked, which is obviously another part of the equation, but that's going to be no matter where you go, you kind of have to take a reading on what sort of team and coaching staff and all that you're going to get into. But by that point, you've had some experience with different teams and coaches and cultures. So you should at least be kind of informed of what you like and what you don't like. And you can use that. But again, so we'll just leave it at be aware that you want to pay attention to everything else besides volleyball that goes into this. From there, you're going to be developing your recruiting materials, which is primarily some kind of profile / CV, which could just be an email template with all the stuff that you want to send. It could be a PDF. It could be something that sits on a website somewhere. There's a lot of different options for that. And then video. You absolutely positively have to have good video. We're not going to get into putting that video together because we've actually got somebody who's done a quick video on how to put these highlight reels together, and I'll share that with everybody afterwards. So that'll be covered there. But you do want a good highlight video, and you do want available raw footage that you can also share, because chances are if somebody's interested, if the highlight video does its job, they're going to want to see an actual at least a full set, if not a full match. So have those things available all the time, and make sure this goes into step 4. Make sure in your communications that you're sharing them, because there's nothing more frustrating as a recruiting coach receiving an email, says all the right things, good introduction, I'm this and that, and there's no video. Like, well, you automatically get discarded until you send the video, because we have no basis to say, oh, is they good? Are they not good? Whatever. So always, 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 even if you're just kind of randomly corresponding with them, maybe put it in your signature that here's my YouTube channel, here's my highlight video, whatever. Just have it in there so you're never going to forget it. All right. So as I said, that next step is the communication phase, which can go on for a while. Lots of back and forth. There's lots of different schools. You're going to probably want to go on visits at a certain point. Yeah, this day and age, we can do a lot of stuff over electronic medium, but it's not the same as actually being on campus, getting to understand what the environment is like, how that feels, what is the size implications of that campus, that those number of students, that sort of thing, and what that means for you. You're presumably, hopefully, going to get offers based on all those communications and those visits. And then ultimately, you've got the decision at the end. So how this all happens, it won't necessarily go directly in this order, but it'll go vaguely in this order. Certain things might happen before or after other things. But as long as you do all of this stuff, this is kind of the complete process. So, which kind of brings us into the hows and whens, and these are the questions that tend to come up a lot. All right, so Katelynn, you started pretty early. You knew very early that you wanted to go to college, play volleyball.
Yeah, and also kind of what helped is, my mom did it, my brother did, my older brother did it, I had cousins, so I quite knew from a young age I wanted to play university sports. So then that went into, my academics, making sure my academics were there, because I knew I also wanted to go to grad school. So making sure that, I had everything in order from quite a young age, and just trying to gather film and play for the right club teams and get as much court time as they could.
Yeah, not everybody starts that early. In fact, a lot of people don't start that early, and it kind of depends on obviously what level they're targeting. Division III, kind of at the lower end, it's going to be a lot of late deciders. Kind of people that figured maybe during their last year of high school, I'm not ready to stop playing. I want to play in college. If you're talking the top end of the sport, they're going to try to recruit you as quickly and get you set as early as possible. The portal has kind of mixed that up a little bit the last couple of years, but I suspect it'll kind of settle down a little more in the years ahead. In Division I and II, they put in some restrictions a couple of years ago because they were worried about early recruitment. As early as 14-year-olds committing to schools, when obviously they wouldn't be going to those schools until they're 18. So to kind of cut that down, they said coaches are not allowed to have contact with these athletes until basically middle of June after their second year of high school. So after grade 10, then they can start having contacts. Now, again, that's not to say that recruitment stuff didn't go on through club coaches and through high school coaches, and you can go to camps and things like that. They're just restricted from actually doing any kind of recruiting presentation or anything like that for you while you're there. But camps can still be an opportunity to go see the campus, see how the coaches, probably meet some of the players, that sort of thing. So there's still some opportunities to go to school, and there's unofficial visits, which is when you go on your own, motivation, on your own expense to visit a school. You wouldn't be able to go see the coaches if you're before that June 15th mark, but you can at least see the campus, meet with admissions, talk to some people in the academic department that you want to talk to, somebody in financial aid, all the other things that you would be interested in learning about that school in that area. Division III does not have this restriction, but you don't really see a lot of early recruitment in Division III either. It's just everything tends to happen a little bit later. So when people ask, when do you start the process? I would generally say you probably want to be starting to get yourself on the radar. If you're targeting better schools in Division I, Division II, you probably want to be getting on their radar during about grade 10. It's not the end of the world if you're not, but that's kind of the timeline when you want to actually do your introduction email, send them your video, think about going to camp, think about doing visits to schools, that sort of stuff. And then once they're allowed to, contact you back, they can start the process of really engaging with you in that conversation. Obviously, hopefully, they're interested. But again, you don't have to start it that early. But I would say okay, how old people grade 10 in the States, that's usually up to about 16. we're going to be turning 16 kind of that year. So in the US, grade 12 is final year of high school. Yeah, Kayla's got a 15 to 16-year-old. So when we kind of talk about juniors in the States, they do it and under instead of under. So basically in the States, 16 and unders is kind of that year. That's kind of the prime, get yourself seen, get your name out there to be recruited. Again, if you're into the next year when you're kind of 16, 17, it's not the end of the world. There's still time. So don't freak out about it as some people might get you thinking. And don't worry if you hear about people in your year being committed already and stuff like that. You have to be a little bit careful with that because nobody can actually officially commit until they're in year 12, so the last year of school. And the earliest possible time is in November. And that's if you're that's when you can sign your letter of intent to get a scholarship. Anything before that is unofficial, is what they call a verbal commitment. And those can be broken. Obviously, we don't encourage that, and you hope that the coaches on the other side stick up to it too. But it's not an official thing until you send the letter of intent. So don't, as I said, don't kind of panic in that whole process. Picking your school, right school, we kind of just talked about. Do your time, do your research. The thing I would add to it, and I don't know, Katelynn, how you obviously talked about, you investigated the competitiveness of the program because you want to win a national championship. And obviously, if that's important to you, you want to look into those things. From a kind of what's a good level for you to target, I always recommend watch as much college volleyball as you can, diversely, like different conferences, different schools, because the levels are all over the place. It's not a clean break, Division I to Division II and Division II to Division III. There's a lot of overlap. Yes, okay, if you're talking probably the top 50 teams in Division I, they're going to beat everybody else. But if you're talking, the top 30 teams in Division II, they're probably going to be competitive with everybody else in Division I. And the same with the Division IIIs. There's some really, really top quality schools with a lot of resources in Division III. They don't give scholarships, so they're not as physically big in a lot of cases, but they play good volleyball. And so I would recommend look up Emory, which is one of the best Division IIIs. I think James Madison is another one. I probably could think of a bunch of them. So get out there and see those levels of play, and also look for the players that are in your position. And kind of a lot of them will have public profiles where you'll be able to find them on YouTube or on one of the recruiting platforms where you can look at their recruiting video, which could also be useful when you're putting your own together, and see where they were at when they were your age. And if you look like they looked at the same time, then chances are you're going to be recruitable for that program. The coaches there will go, okay, you're in the window. If they look way, way bigger and faster and stronger than you, okay, you probably need to lower down where your target window is. Or if you're looking at them going, I'm bigger than these girls, I can hit the ball harder, I got better hands as a setter, okay, move it up a bit. Whether that's changing to a higher or lower division, or just different conferences within the division, or different schools within conferences, there's a lot of flexibility there.
Yeah, I think what John said is, you got to know your priorities and be realistic. Like I said, I knew coming out of high school, okay, I might be able to walk on at some Division I's, but I knew I'd be sitting the bench. And I didn't want that. Some people want to go to Division I to say they went to a Division I. I was more concerned about going somewhere where I had the best chance to be a starter. And so I was happier with going to smaller universities, smaller programs, because I wanted to play. I knew some people that were just concerned about being at a big program with a big name, and they may be a practice player, but that was fine for them. So I think it's being realistic. And like I said, for me, I wasn't happy unless I was on the court. So I chose universities that I would have the best opportunity. Like I said, I was a 5'4" setter. I'm not going to go to these big Division I's, not just skill wise, but also because I'm 5'4", I'm probably not going to be in the front court. So I think it's just, I think being realistic with yourself. And in my case, I had club coaches who coached at the university level who could give me realistic, honest, and, feedback about what was actually achievable. And, I know that can be hard and some hard truths, but if you want your experience to be enjoyable, it's being realistic and then just knowing what you want and what you're happy to settle with or not happy to settle with.
Yeah. Yeah. Like we said, there's a lot to this, and you got to be careful about getting caught up in the other decisions other people have made. Because as Katelynn said, some people say Division I. Some people see, oh, I got a scholarship. Doesn't matter what school it was, what level it was. Hey, I'm on scholarship. Their parents can brag, my kid's on a volleyball scholarship. That you got to decide where you're at. And coaches on this call, this is an important part of your role in all of this, is helping these athletes kind of be realistic about where they should target, what level's good for them. So it really, really behooves you to understand the levels of play involved, because yes, college coaches want to hear from club coaches and high school coaches and all of that. But if you recommend a kid who is not even close to the level that they look for, that they try to bring in, you're going to lose credibility. It does, and physicality is a huge part of this. As much as some people might argue it shouldn't be, it is a huge part of this. Like Katelynn said, at 5'4", she's not playing for Penn State. Just not going to happen.
And I think also, if there's also options. So when I did go to a Division I and Division II, the height of the players got much higher. And so as a result, I had to change positions. I went from being a setter my whole life to, if I wanted court time, I had to become what we have in the US is we have defensive specialists. I became a defensive specialist that was sometimes set out of the backcourt. So as a consequence of moving up levels, I then was no longer a front court player. And so that's just the reality of it. And I was happy with that because, again, I wanted to be on the court. I didn't care if I was a setter, a DS, heck, a middle, as long as I was on the court. So sometimes that may be a reality as well.
Yeah, for sure. And again, this is where, you coaches can really be involved in this whole thing. And encouraging that sort of flexibility and understanding that, okay, you might have been playing middle your whole life at 5'10", but the colleges that you're thinking about going to play for don't recruit 5'10" middles. They might recruit a 5'10" right side or an outside. So let's think about the skills that you need to develop to be competitive in those positions so that you can be recruited. And wearing my talent hat right now for England, we think about those things too. Like if we see somebody who's too small to realistically be in the middle for the national team, but maybe has the athleticism and the ball skills to play on either of the pins, or maybe a small setter who could be a libero, something like that, we're thinking about this sort of stuff. So are these coaches. It's talent ID and development is the same whether you're at a national NGB or whether you're at a university or a two-year college. So just some stuff to keep in mind in there. We had a couple of questions come up just in terms of seeing stuff. I see we've got a list of the schools that somebody's posted the link for. NCSA does put out a lot of free stuff, and they're one of the services that will let you create a profile on there for free. They've got upsells on the back end of that to help you if you actually want help in the recruiting process. And I think there's tiered. I don't know what the costs are because I've only ever been on the recruiting side of that, not on the athlete side of that. But they're one of many services that will, for a fee, pay you stuff out. Leonardo, we'll get to that in one quick question because we had something a little before that. Individual visits in Zoom. I have seen coaches and I think I've even done it myself where if you want to do a campus tour with somebody who can't come in person, they'll walk you around with their phone and do a campus tour that way. So that is a possibility. Obviously, it's not the same as being there in person. And oftentimes you get handed around if you're ever in that situation.
Yeah.
It's like you'll start with the coach and then you'll end up with one player, they'll pass you off to another player, and just so you'll get to see a lot of different things, which can be really cool. And you can kind of create some relationships that way that maybe you wouldn't in another way. Again, still not the same as being on campus, but it is an alternative. In terms of beach, the process is basically the same. Okay, yeah, they're going to look at different considerations in terms of what your skill set is and your athleticism and stuff like that. Beach players generally aren't as big as indoor players, but they're not exactly tiny either. So that, you still it still helps to be tall and jump well and have ball handling skills. The one thing that I would say related to kind of, can you play beach and indoor? Because some people do that. That's less of a thing now than it used to be, but it's still there. You cannot be on a beach scholarship and be on the indoor team. That's not allowed. It can go the other way. You can be on an indoor scholarship and play on the beach team. That's permitted. That rule is because they don't want the indoor teams to stack with people on beach scholarships, which is probably less a concern than it was when they put the rule in place, but it's still there. So just to be aware. The timelines are just going to be a little bit different for beach because the seasons are a little different. Whereas obviously indoor, especially on the women's side, indoor volleyball is fall. Beach volleyball is spring. And obviously the primary competition season for them to go watch juniors play and to do recruitment is going to be kind of late spring, over the summer, kind of early fall. Whereas for indoor coaches, their primary recruiting is going to basically be January to May, kind of into the early part of summer as well, because that's when the junior competitions are going. A little different with the men, because again, the men are on a spring season in indoor. The junior season for the men starts kind of in December, runs to about March. Then there's a bit of a break because they've got their season for the boys in high school, and then they'll pick up with national championship tournaments at the end of the season, basically in the same timeline as the girls. Broadly speaking, it's my experience that boys recruiting always lags girls recruiting. Girls are just more on it and organized and prepared and forward thinking than the boys are. So I'm sure men's coaches would love to get more recruiting done earlier on the men's side, but the reality is the boys they're not as ready to get in on it. So if you are in a situation where you want to go somewhere and get recruited, if you're in there early, you probably have an advantage, to be completely honest. We've got a question on uni, but we'll hold that one because there's one last thing we got in here. Well, we've got a couple of things about how we communicate. We mentioned when you can always email a school. As we said, Division III, there's no restrictions. Division I and II, you can email them anytime you want. They just can't answer other than maybe to provide you camp information or to say, thank you, we got your email. That's the extent of how they can respond until that June 15th date after going into basically your third year of high school. So again, you're allowed to communicate anytime. Don't try to call them in that time frame because that would be a violation. They wouldn't be able to talk to you. So avoid that to keep from creating any problems. But like I said, you can introduce yourself anytime you want and send them updates. One of the questions that comes up is how often should you follow up? It depends on obviously how much response you're getting. You send your intro. If they're within the communication window, then if they see something interesting, they're probably going to get back to you fairly quickly, depending on what time of year it is. Because obviously, if they're in season, they've got a lot going on, and recruiting will take a backseat to the actual training and match prep and all of that sort of stuff. So don't get stressed out if they're in season and they're not responding to you right away. But if it's been a couple of weeks and you heard anything, go ahead, follow up, especially if you have something additional that you can say, hey, I've got new video, or my club team just won this big tournament, or my school team just won state championships, or whatever you might have that gives you an excuse to email them. We can't really get in here in terms of the whole how should you handle all this, because it's how different coaches and schools interact back and forth with recruits and when they do it and all that it's going to vary a lot. That would be kind of more of a customized conversation that you'd want to have maybe with your advisors, people who've been through it before that can help out. But generally speaking, if you haven't heard back after a couple of emails, 3 or 4 emails, chances are you're not going to be somebody on their priority list, and you want to be still looking at other places. That doesn't mean there's not a chance down the line. Maybe they don't get the person that they thought they were going to get, and they go back to their list. And maybe if you're still there, okay, you can still be live on the list. But just, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and then have them go elsewhere, because keep in mind that they may only have a limited number of spots, and that might be one in your position. And then how many girls or boys are reaching out to them to try to be the one person they bring in there. And then, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say how I can't even put the number on how many universities and programs I contacted as a player. I just, even if I knew maybe it was a bit out of my range, I went for it, because the worst that they can do is either not respond or say no. And I think in total, I probably visited 10 programs, 10 unis between high school and my junior college. And, you just got to put yourself out there, even if, they can't respond back. Just say I'm playing in this tournament. And although they may not be able to contact you, they might be able to watch you and then go, okay, on this date, I can email this player and I will. And so, don't put all your eggs in one basket, and, just broaden your horizon and your options as much as possible. And then, hopefully the more options you have and the more information you have, you can make the best decision for yourself.
Yeah. And one thing that can help you in your targeting, a lot of people will kind of recommend have some schools that are reach schools, then have your kind of core, and then maybe have a couple that are safety schools that, you would probably be a good recruit for them. So they would really be eager to have you, but make sure all the rest of it lines up too. There was just something I was thinking of that I kind of just completely lost. But anyway, we'll power on and maybe it'll come up again. We had a couple of questions here. Are scholarships renewable or competitive? Do you need to reapply? Technically, scholarships are 1 year at a time. So basically what happens is at the end of the academic year, if they plan on keeping you on scholarship for the next year, you'll come in and you'll sign some paperwork to renew. Schools can commit. They can tell you, we're going to put you on scholarship for 4 years, but by NCAA rules, they can only actually do it 1 year at a time administratively. So that's a conversation to have, because there are different situations. You can get recruited in someone and they can say, okay, you're full ride, 4 years, nice, simple, easy. There's other situations based on what their current scholarship allocation is, where, okay, we might not have one for you in the first year, but then we can give it to you for 3 years after that, because somebody will graduate and that scholarship will come free. Again, that's a verbal thing. It's not going to be something that is official until you're signing papers. So just be aware of it. It's theoretically possible that somebody could change their mind and go in a different direction. And obviously, if you're not keeping up grades, as Katelynn mentioned, or you're not performing, you're not training well, you're just not up to the standard, they think they can recruit over you, then they're perfectly, able to bring somebody else in and give them your scholarship. Injuries is a tricky one. A lot of schools wouldn't just automatically drop a player on scholarship if they got hurt, like an ACL tear or something like that. But there are some that would, or at least some coaches that would. So just kind of, it might be a question that you ask going in to try to feel them out. Other than that, yeah, like I said, it's technically a year-to-year thing. How do I determine what level my child is at we went over that. You watch a lot of college volleyball for sure. Or any options if you're already in uni here in the States and thinking of transferring? You could theoretically do that as a grad.
Mhm.
It is an option. It is an option. The way it works in terms of eligibility is based on how long you've been at uni, and the NCAA is really not going to count your years over here too much in terms of having played college volleyball in the States as far as they're concerned, but how long you're a student does count. So if you're here for 3 years, kind of like on a standard bachelor's degree program here, then you're going to use up 3 of your years of overall eligibility. So in the NCAA, you're allowed 5 total.
Yep.
Well, it's actually 10 full-time semesters. That's how they count it, to play 4 seasons. So this is where kind of red shirt or injury thing that I talked about before is if somebody goes 4 years, but because of an injury or whatever, only plays 3, they still have 2 more semesters that they can use to get that last year of eligibility in. And you can even split it up. When I coached in Texas, the school that I was at had a player who had played 2 seasons when she was an undergraduate, had quit volleyball, still graduated, but then came back to the school to get her master's. She still had 2 years of eligibility left to play volleyball, but because she had done her 4 years, her 8 semesters, she only had 2 semesters left. So basically she had to do a split thing where during season she was full-time student, because you have to be a full-time student to be able to play. And then during the off season, she was part-time student, which meant she couldn't do any of the team stuff with the team. But what she did instead was she came and watched and then did it all herself afterwards, like with the lifting and all that stuff. So it was tricky and awkward, but it could happen. So there is the possibility. And for grad stuff, there's no communication restriction. You can reach out to them at any time. Since we're already onto the communication, I'll advance my slide and we'll go to that screen. If you have an American citizenship, but only have education in the UK, started playing late, what would the process? As an American citizen, obviously you don't have to worry about the student visa bit. You would still need to worry about getting transcripts to the schools that are in the fashion that they need them to be. Coming from the UK won't be that big a deal because obviously it's in the same language. And most of the universities that you would probably apply to would understand the UK system. And so it wouldn't be that big a deal. In terms of timeline, it's similar timeline to what we've talked about. And going versus staying, it's a good question, and this is part of that overall. What do you want? It depends on ultimately you're going to get a more probably. There's a way to put this. There's like 5 performance volleyball programs in the UK right now. And when we say performance programs, for those who don't know, they train 4 or 5 times a week. They play regularly. The teams play in the NVL alongside playing in Bucks. They have physio support. They have medical support to greater or lesser degrees. There's probably another 5 or 6 unis that are kind of like partially performance. They have some bits of it. Maybe they don't have a full-time coach, those sorts of things. And then the rest of them are just non-performance. They're student clubs. They may have a coach. They may not have a coach. Loughborough falls into that category. So there's a lot of variability as to what exactly you would be getting where you go in the UK. Alex Chinnery, who's one of the coaches at Essex, is going to do a video. I don't know if you were involved in that, Katelynn, but that talks about UK uni recruitment and what that all involves. So we'll be able to share that when he's done. You kind of just have to look at, well, where could I go in the UK versus where could I go in the States? What's the difference in what I want versus what I can get? Katelynn kind of shared what the what the student athlete life is like. It's going to be more intense during season for sure. The season is shorter, but more intense, whereas in the UK, the uni's basically on a very similar schedule to what the club schedule is, what the MVL schedule is, especially since they're playing in the MVL.
Yeah.
It's spread out from basically October to March, April, depending on how far you advance. So it's just a little bit of a different beast. But again, you can have a good experience in either one. It's just the kind of experience that you want in the level of volleyball. What age can you go into the state system? Well, any age theoretically. There are definitely people who do gap years and then apply. So if you're in year 12 and you're thinking maybe you won't be quite ready to go next year, that's fine. You could do a gap year and apply for a year out. You just have to be clear in your communication with the unis that that's what you're doing. I'm going to graduate here, but I wouldn't plan to come over there, because it's going to put you in a different category as far as, because they recruit by years. Obviously based on, who they're losing from their roster and what spots they need to fill and who they've got coming in. But there's no restriction on that. It's just where you are. You might have to, if you still want to do it and try to get recruited to go over there next year, you just have to accelerate things a bit and get on the ball with sending out your intro emails and your video and all that more quickly, because they're into that flow right now with folks in your year. Just turned 16 this year, so yeah, you can start sending out emails right now. And yes, definitely mention academics, because they are going to want to know that, especially in a situation where you might only be in line for a partial athletic scholarship, or you're looking at Division III school where they don't have any. And yes, that is an option. Georgia, I forget Georgia's last name, but she made a lot of waves this year playing, in the national semifinals in Division III at Claremont Mud Scripps in California. So it's not like you have to strictly go Division I, Division II. They will look at GCSEs and A levels. As I mentioned, the universities over there, the coaches will probably be clueless, but the admissions departments, they'll understand what that looks like. So the coaches will have communication if they're interested in you as a volleyball player. SATs depends on the school. A lot of schools since COVID have dropped it, but not all of them. So it's something you'll have to ask them about. Yeah. As for how you apply, no, entirely different system in the US. You have to apply to each school individually. Now, there are systems like the Common Application, where it makes it really easy to send your application off to a bunch of different schools without having to fill in each of them separately. But it's not like the UCAS system at all. It's on you, go direct to that school. There's no kind of central student repository from which, the assignments sort of kind of get made. Mentioned the ACT, SAT, asking UCAS, so no. Again, lots of questions about test scores. Again, for the 18-year-olds, yeah, at this stage, you would probably be late in the process for the unis over there, which doesn't mean it's out of the question. You could still give it a shot, but you might want to have some flexibility just in terms of, hey, if there's something I really want to do, if I don't get picked up, I don't get the interest now, I'm gonna maybe I'll do a gap year. But if you do a gap year, and I will say this, you've got to have a plan from the volleyball perspective, because obviously they're not going to be interested in somebody saying, well, okay, I'm just going to go travel around Europe on holiday for 12 months. I'm not going to play any volleyball. I'm not going to do any training, because they're going to want to see you progressing, and they're going to want to picture where you're going to be coming in to their program, as opposed to, where you are now. Because it's, as I mentioned with the national team stuff, it's all about projections and where you think you can be and where these coaches see you. So yeah, it's an option. just be really good in your communication about that and have a plan for staying on top of the volleyball stuff. Basis for academic scholarships. Most of it is transcript based. The schools where they do want SATs and such will factor it in, but it tends not to be a huge factor. It's almost entirely transcripts. So, you know, the better you are there, the more likely you are to get a bigger, better scholarship. And if you're not in a situation where it's going to be full ride, then you definitely want to be having the question, because different schools have different size academic scholarships. I've been places where it's been a couple $1,000s and it hasn't really been a big impact. And I've been places where you could get 10, 15, 20,000 and it's going to have a big impact and can really make up a gap. As for what transcript based means, that's just what's your grades? What are your class grades? GCSEs will count into that. A levels will count into that. But it's whatever your academic report is that your school is going to send to the unis as the official transcript. That's what they're going to look at to decide anything academic related, full scholarship and admissions. Because just keep in mind that while in a lot of cases, if you're a volleyball recruit, you're going to have an easy time getting in through admissions, you still do have to apply. And for schools that are stronger on the academic side of things, athletics may not play a part at all, or may play a very small part. So good grades always matters.
And it helps with recruiting as well. If you, because like John has mentioned, you know, some programs, you know, they don't have a ton of money. So you say they're trying to decide between me and John. John has great academics. He requires less volleyball financial aid or volleyball scholarship, which means they can now give that scholarship to another player they want, versus me, who I get no academic scholarship. So they would have to give me more money to come to the university. So in a way, the more you can offer academically, that can sometimes be a bonus point for you when they're trying to spread the money as much as they can, get as many good players as they can. That can sometimes be a tool which can use in your favor. And it definitely helped in my favor because it freed up some money for teammates or for other recruits that they wanted to bring in versus me taking more volleyball money.
Yeah. Plus, they don't want to have to worry about you failing out.
Right. And because there is a GPA or a grade point average that you do have to maintain to be able to play, practice, travel, and if you don't meet it, you can't play.
Also, there's a credit, forgetting the term for it, but you have to meet a certain number of credits progressively. So I think after your first year, you have to have gotten at least 24 total credits, I think is what the NCAA rule is. But, you know, so you can't be a situation where you take classes, fail classes, don't get your credits, because you'll lose eligibility for the next year, which obviously I've seen happen. You don't want that being the case. Somebody asked, what are the 5 performance schools? So Essex, Nottingham.
Is it Leeds,
Durham,
Northumbria?
Not Northumbria anymore. They used to be. Durham is up there. I think Newcastle, Sheffield Hallam used to be, but isn't anymore. UEL is on that list. Or East London. But it does kind of change a bit. Not always consistent. Right now, I mean, in terms of which schools are like the really strong ones, Durham on the women's side is consistently strong, mostly because they recruit grad students from the US and Canada. Essex is strong, Nottingham is strong. UEL, some years has been quite good. Other years, they've been a little bit more mediocre. But yeah, like the same rules apply here in the UK as apply to looking at schools in the States. Take the whole thing in and not just, is this a performance program? Is it not? High profiles. Katerina did did you get clarity on your question about what a transcript is? And in terms of Jesse's question about getting seen, it's tricky. The better funded universities with bigger recruiting budgets will send coaches over to watch players, whether it be in events in Europe. There are some kind of scouting events that I think Bring It is one of those organizations that I don't know if they still do, but they used to do. And there are some kind of university type-ish competitions that they'll go and watch. But if there's somebody that they are really interested in and they've got the money to come to the UK and watch, they will do it. It's just not going to be everybody that has that. Like when we were at Radford, there was no way I was going to be able to do that. That would have blown most of our recruiting budget for a year. So, but a lot of them will be happy if they may ask you for more video than they would for somebody that they're going to be able to see. They may ask you to come to camp, you know, something like that, if that's an option for you. So there are ways. It's not as easy as in the US where they can just come watch a junior competition, but there are ways. For Nick, height profiles on the men's side. Take a look at the rosters. That's going to tell you a lot. Unfortunately, boys tend to grow even when they're in college, so you might not get a perfect view. But a lot of times when you look at the rosters on the universities and just search, pick a school, UCLA men's volleyball roster, put that into Google, you'll be able to go straight to their roster page. You'll see all the guys that are on the team. It'll tell you what year they are, what their height is. Usually if you click in their profile, you can see their kind of ongoing profile before and their pictures. And some of these guys are really super baby face when they first get it. Like the progression of profile pictures for the guys is wow. For the girls, their heights are generally stabilized by that point. So you'll have a good sense. But yeah, that's going to be a thing. Just like looking at video of recruits that they've brought in, that's going to tell you, you know, the sort of profiles they're looking for. Obviously, that doesn't tell you how high they jump, but if you watch them on video, you'll get a bit more of that. Did you apply for both sport and academic scholarship? Yes, you can. A lot of times it's an automatic thing. Like simply applying to the university as part of their admissions process, they will figure out what they're willing to give you from an academics perspective and anything else. Yeah, there might be some special things, special grants or special scholarships that you would need to apply for, but they're usually telling you that sort of thing. They're like, okay, here's the list of stuff that's available in the deadlines and how to do it. But for kind of the general academic scholarship, it's going to be part of your admissions package if you're eligible for it, and they'll communicate it to you kind of with your offer. So they'll say, you know, we've accepted you, here's your offer, and it'll go through all of the basic details. And then they're usually really good about having conversations if you want explanations about things. So it's pretty straightforward to get on with that. If you're 12 right now, yeah, I mean, I would get moving on it for sure, because they're already well into the window of recruiting for your class. Now, it's not the end of the world. They won't have filled everything up, but you know, you at least want to be on their radar so that maybe they do have a commitment that decommits or something happens, somebody transfers off the team and they need to fill a spot. So yeah, earlier is better, and to get that communication and reach out. I think, who's this? Izzy's question. I think it applies to men and women, not just women. Would a short setter opposite with a good vertical be considered the same as tall setter opposite? Honestly, no, but it depends. It always depends. The benefit of the taller player is they don't have to they don't have as far to go. So even if you have the same ultimate reach on your block or your attack, it takes a smaller player longer to get there. So there's slight disadvantages in that. Now, so that in Arkansas this year had a 5'7" outside hitter who was
From
an All-American.
Kansas.
Yeah, so it's not impossible. You're probably not going to be a short opposite in this day and age. You can more get away with being a shorter outside hitter if you got the ball skills. Just because opposites these days, especially, I mean, it's been this way for a long time in the men's game where it's kind of like your job is to score points through blocking, serving, and hitting. Women's game hasn't always been that way, but it's definitely moved in that direction recently. So just something to keep in mind. Pros and cons, US versus Canada. Well, I can tell you, I don't know a lot about the Canadian system. I believe they go 5 years in terms of how much you can play. They don't have the same restrictions on amateurism that the NCAA does, which is something we haven't even really talked about. It's not something that comes up a lot for UK players because we don't really have any pro teams in the UK. But from other parts of Europe, this has been an issue. So, for example, I think the basic rule right now is, say you're German. If you were on a Bundesliga 1 team, so first division team, that's considered fully professional. You would be considered a professional and not eligible to play in the NCAA. If it was second Bundesliga, which is more semi-pro, as long as you didn't receive more than the cost of being part of the team and like reimbursement and stuff, then you'd be fine. You wouldn't have an issue with that. So it depends. Like I said, Canada doesn't really have that sort of restriction, kind of like in the UK. The UK unis don't worry about that either. I think process-wise, they're roughly the same in terms of you got to apply to the universities themselves. Recruiting is recruiting in terms of videos and communication with coaches and all of that. I'm not aware of their rules. I can almost guarantee that they're way looser than anything the NCAA's got because everybody is. But feel free to reach out because they'll tell you, obviously, what their timelines are, what their rules are. I mean, they're happy to get the best athletes they can get wherever they come from. All right. Any other questions that are floating out there? Anything we haven't talked about, Katelynn, that maybe we should?
I mean, I'm sure we may have missed something, but there's so many things to touch on. But I think that was a good whistle-stop tour.
Yeah. Which
Yeah,
at this stage is really all it can be.
Yeah, and I think what John has said as well is just ask questions. Don't be afraid to contact the universities, whether it's about admissions or volleyball or about both. The best is just to contact the admissions office and just ask. I'm from here. These are my grades. These are the majors I'm considering. What's the timeline? What's the process? How do I apply for academic scholarship? The more questions you can ask, the more information you can get, which then hopefully gives you an opportunity to make an informed decision.
Okay. We had one question on availability of video and slides. We are recording this, so I believe once the recording is finished processing, you should get a link to it. If not, I'll make sure it gets sent out, and we'll put it somewhere as well, so it's publicly available. I don't know if that's going to be on the VE YouTube channel somewhere or whatever. You want to give out your email, Katelynn?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm happy to. Just sometimes my response time is a little bit slow.
I can attest to that.
Yes.
Mine's pretty easy. You can also find mine on the VE website too. So
yeah, mine's on the Loughborough website. Actually, I'm on staff at the university, so it's on there. If you Google me.
I think I spelled everything right in mine.
Yeah, I think mine's.
There was one other one I thought. The question from Katrina was, you need a certain number of years experience to apply. No, but obviously where you are as a player is going to factor into this. So if it's between you with 2 years experience and somebody with 6 years experience, chances are their game is more developed at that stage. All else being equal, they're probably going to be the one they go with just because it shows up in their game. Now, if you're a physical specimen, really good athletic profile, the coaches can clearly see your development and your upside, they're going to look at that. They're going to take that seriously. It might depend on whether they need somebody to come in and start right away, or they can bring you in, maybe redshirt you for a year, so you don't play for your first season, for example, but you train and do everything else. And so you don't burn a year of eligibility. You'll still have that extra year to play further on, with the idea that, okay, you may not be an immediate contributor, but I can see you 2 years down the line being competing for starting time and all that sort of stuff. So again, that will come into the consideration for you. Is you want to go somewhere where you're going to play right away, like Katelynn did, you may not want that because you're going to have to sit behind other people. If you're okay with that and you're happy to continue your development as an athlete, then okay, you can look at those sort of situations. Just have honest conversations with the coaches about, okay, where do you see me needing to develop? What kind of, how am I going to get toward that? When does it happen? Be aware that that sort of stuff tends to happen in the spring, especially for freshmen coming in, first years coming in, because you're going to get thrown right into the season. And there's not a lot of time for individual development in that context. The spring for first years is a huge time because that's when you really get into the strength and conditioning program. You really get to learn kind of how the coach wants you to do things technically, the tactical things, all of that sort of stuff. So just be aware that, you're kind of thrown into the deep end of the pool for women's players. Men's players, it's the other way around. They actually have the first semester to do all of that sort of stuff, work on the technical stuff, work on the systems of play as a collective, and kind of get more acclimated into just being a student athlete and not having to play any real matches until January. All right. Any other ones come in? Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Katelynn.
No, thank you.
We'll get this out there as soon as it's available and whatever price we can get out there. And I will, as I mentioned, I will share that link to the video Alex Chinnery did about tips for putting together a good highlight video, both from a technical perspective and also what to include, because there are better ones than some others. Believe me, I've seen some really bad videos.
Yeah, and I think for those of you that are really serious about going to the US, that'd be a great webinar or video to watch, because John can probably attest to this, how many videos and emails you are getting daily. And so, something that's, the best produced, best quality, I'm sure it does help when, coaches are going through largest amount of film.
And they go through a lot. They go through a lot. Hundreds of kids a year are sending coaches video. And so you want to hit them straight up, like in the first 30 seconds, your best stuff. Because if you don't, if they're unimpressed by the first 30 seconds, they're not going to watch the rest. And then it's all kind of downhill from there. So this is sales pitch. You're marketing yourself. And so put your best self out there right away. Okay, so Henry got his answers, got his link for schools, and somebody's got a hand up. I can't see who it is.
I think it's Anya.
Anya, okay. You have a question, Anya, or did you just accidentally hit the thing?
John, there was a question from Nick about, will a talent pathway promote VE's athletes to US schools, or is it down to the athletes and parents? I don't know if you answered that and I missed that.
No. We're definitely working toward creating systems to facilitate this whole process. The tricky bit is, and as some of you will know, I actually coached at Exeter Uni about 10 years ago when I first came over to the States. And I had a conversation with somebody who was at VE at the time about recruiting. And I said, I'm happy to help out in whatever way. And so the immediate response was, well, where should we send our players? Well, you can guess my response to that based on what we talked about at the beginning of this video about how complicated a question that is. So we can certainly help in terms of referrals, and we do want to we've got some stuff working on providing a platform for people to actually create profiles and learn how to put all that stuff together and market themselves. But we're not going to be well positioned to just say, okay, we've got this player, we're going to blast them out to these different schools, because we don't know if those are going to be a good fit. We don't want to blast you out to a bunch of schools that aren't going to work. That would be counterproductive, to say the least. So, Leah, yes, there's only women's volleyball for beach right now. There's probably been some men's club programs in the States. And yes, there is club volleyball, very much like there is club volleyball in the UK unis. It sits on a different level. So we in the States would call like the normal team varsity. Those are varsity programs that we're talking about you getting recruited to. Below that, and it's not part of the athletic department, it usually falls under recreation or student services or something like that. There are a lot of student clubs. It's under that student club umbrella that'll cover things like the Spanish Language Society, and geologists of the 2020s. I don't know, I'm making stuff up. It usually falls under that umbrella, and it's they're run by the participants, like the captain of the team or whatever. So that is a legitimate option if you don't want the intensity of a varsity experience, or the school that you're really interested in going to doesn't have men's beach volleyball, for example. They may have a club version of it. So like at Radford, we only had a women's volleyball team. We didn't have a men's volleyball team, but we did have a women's volleyball club and a men's volleyball club. So there was that lower tier opportunity. Right. Anything else before we wrap this up? And those of you who are members of the juniors coaches groups, you obviously know you can send questions in there anytime, and we'll get answers to you there as well. So, all right, folks, I think we can wrap it there. Thank you, Katelynn.
Yes, thank you, John, and thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody for rocking on up. Hope we gave you a lot to think about. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday night and back to work or school or whatever you got tomorrow.